So welcome everybody who braved the winter conditions to get to LPC. And I'd like to ask for a motion to approve the minutes, or if anybody has any comments on them, take them now.
Motion approved. Second.
Thanks, Jewel. We have a motion and second to approve the minutes from January 30th. All in favor? Aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, those are approved. Thank you. Okay, let's go right to homeless mitigation funding.
Hot Molly, get going.
And Molly has some good news for us, those of us that are hoping for more mitigation funding from the state.
Right. Well, can I do a couple things real quick? Sorry, I'm going to take from Molly really quickly. We do have some Slido, at least one Slido question coming later in the meeting. So if you want to go to that now, here's the, or do we have one now, Carson? Okay, so we do have a Slido right now just to get ourselves warmed up. So I know, because that's, so pull out your phones, scan the QR code. Yes, and Liam reminds me to remind you that if you have not signed in, please do so, because we are going to be taking positions on things today, so we will need to know how many people are actually here that are eligible to vote.
Those will be voting members.
Voting members of the LPC, please sign in. All right, Carson. All right, are we ready? Is everyone ready for me to advance? I see people still taking pictures. I'm going to give you 10 more seconds. Kate's so ready. We should hand out prizes. That would make this exciting, right?
Ooh. Like have like the stale Halloween candy we
Yes.
in the crowd.
The chips that are left over from last week, you can have those.
The broccoli salad with
A broccoli salad, yes.
who wants
The
the
salad
chicken
within the
sandwich?
salad. All right. Okay. Our question today is: have you talked to your legislators in the last, or to your legislator or legislators, multiple, in the last 3 weeks? The yes is coming on strong. I feel like I should do it like an old-timey horse racing voice, but we TBD. We'll see what the votes are. All right, so good job. Thank you, everyone, for reaching out to legislators. Appreciate that. Going to leave this on just for a second. Okay. Mayor, I don't know if you want to talk about these key messages really quick. Me too. Just talk about our 2 key messages we just want to remind everybody of.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so just as a reminder too, as you're talking to legislators, 2 big key messages we have this session. The state keeps talking about their surplus, the extra monies they have. The state has a surplus, but cities do not. There are a lot of bills out there that they may be good policy ideas even sometimes not good policy ideas, but they do ultimately impact your budgets at the city level. So it's a great reminder when you're talking to legislators that even though they have a surplus, there's cuts they want to make, there's money they want to give back. The cities are not in the same position, and it's important to remind them of. And also that they can partner on local growth or on growth issues with municipalities, with the cities and towns. This is partnership, not preemption. There's a lot of good things happening out there, and if they talk to us, we can help them in a lot of cases get where they want to go without unnecessary legislation. We did the minutes. Reminder again, if you go to the bill tracker, ulct.org/bills, and look at that now, please send us a text and email if there are positions on bills that we want to take. I will note that there are several that are blank or position pending. There's 2 reasons for that. One, because we're still trying to negotiate on several bills, and sometimes, I'll just admit it, we're still reading the bills and getting through some of them, to be completely upfront and honest. And now, Molly, you can talk about homelessness.
So I just want to say one thing about partnering is that, if you have a chance to talk to legislators, the league gets accused of saying no to everything. Well, this year, we've actually made some proposals, like on subdivisions, that are moving, could move the needle, or directed to the things that we've been hearing from them. So, mention that to them, that the league is coming up with solutions and trying to partner with them. It's not just a party of no.
Hi everyone. I think y'all got a good break from listening to me come talk to you about homelessness. Well, some of you. Some of you have not. This has been like a year-long party we've been having. But there have been some changes that we're looking at with the mitigation fund this year. And so we wanted to come and chat with you all before Elison releases his bill. We don't still totally know what is in his bill, but we wanted to let you know that there will likely be changes, just so you weren't shell-shocked when that comes out. So for a little bit of background, the Homeless Shelter Mitigation Fund was created in 2018 with the intent of helping shelter cities offset the costs that they incurred by hosting a shelter. When it was created, there were about 5 cities that were eligible for the fund. And you know, as we talk about this, it's important to know that every city participates in some way when we're talking about homelessness. You either host a shelter or you contribute to the Homeless Mitigation Fund. Currently, the status quo is that you contribute 1.8% of your 50% of that population distribution to the mitigation fund to help shelter cities offset their expenses. Some stuff has obviously changed since 2018. There are more mouths to feed from that fund. So we've grown from about 5 cities that were eligible for the funding in 2018 to 10 cities that are eligible now. We're looking at more cities coming online. Just in this next year, we expect Tooele to come online, and then Vernal also vacillates back and forth as to whether or not they have a qualifying shelter. Last year was a really big year for the fund. We were able to secure $5 million of state dollars ongoing and an additional $1 million of the ARPA funding. So this meant that locals were contributing about $6.5 million, and the state began contributing $5 million. All of that said, the shelter cities are still running massive deficits in their with the costs, the public safety and community costs of hosting a shelter. Last year, the big 5 shelter cities that we talk about, those tier 1, paid about $32 million in public safety expenses to host shelters. And they received about 10.5 from the mitigation fund, which left them with a $22 million deficit that their taxpayers then have to shoulder. And then again, you can see the breakdown, right? So about $5.5 million came from cities and towns last year, $6 million from the state of Utah. It doesn't totally add up with the last point because there's some different tiers of shelter cities. So we have the big 5, Ogden, Salt Lake, South Salt Lake, Midvale, and St. George, who are in that first tier, who really do the heavy lifting for homelessness in the state. And then we have some smaller shelter cities throughout the state, including Richfield, Cedar City, and Logan, that also have some emergency shelters. So that gets us to our current landscape. As some of you may remember, last year HB 440 required all of Salt Lake County to go through the process of siting an overflow facility. Throughout that process, the Salt Lake County mayors supported increasing local contributions to the mitigation fund. And then additionally this year on January 18th, the ULCT Board of Directors voted to approve the following negotiations. So one was increasing the local contribution rate in caps to secure an additional $2.5 million of local dollars, accompanied by $2.5 million in a state increase to match the local funds. Some news on that: last week, Social Services prioritized the local match at 61 of 63 appropriation items, which was about a worst case scenario for us. A lot of our folks, both from shelter cities and non-shelter cities, really hit the pavement to move that up, and this morning it was prioritized at 25, which is huge for us. So thank you to all of our league family who helped us get that done. And then additionally, the board authorized us to negotiate how we reduce the preemption buffers in the 440 fail-safe. So what we're looking at now is, again, the goal is to secure additional financial support in the mitigation fund for these shelter cities. We're looking at a city and town increase of about $2.5 million collectively. As I mentioned, the Salt Lake County Conference of Mayors supported more city dollars, as did the board. And Wayne and Representative Elison are working to determine exactly what contribution rate and contribution caps that's going to look like to generate those dollars. And then again, we're expecting to see $2.5 million of state dollars. That is still not an assured thing. That's something we still really need to be pushing for. Ultimately, this would get the total mitigation funding to about $16.5 million. That would be able to refund essentially the shelter cities for about half of their expenses, Right now, we're really only helping them with about a third of their expenses. So this week, again, as I mentioned, the appropriation prioritization is going to continue happening, and then we expect the 440 replacement bill on homelessness policy in the state to come out soon. Again, we don't have a bill, but we just wanted to take a minute and let you know all of those updates so that when a bill did come out, you weren't taken off guard by it. Are there any, yeah, Tawny?
I just
Oh.
thanks, Leanne. I just want to encourage any cities who are not receiving mitigation funds to reach out to their legislators. A lot of times, we let those cities like Salt Lake and South Salt Lake carry the water on something like this. I was really surprised when I talked to my legislators this last week about the bill that, first of all, they did not know there was a city match or a local match. They thought it was a state-funded operation. And we need to make sure that they know that we're paying in. But also, this is one that we can't let those 5 cities carry the water on. So it's absolutely essential that you reach out to your legislators and make sure that they understand that this is something that mitigation recipients as well as those paying into the fund support, because otherwise they tend to think of this as a Salt Lake City bill, and we know what the legislature likes to do with Salt Lake City bills.
Thanks, Tawny. I think that's a super important point. You know, actually, the sales pitch to our legislators should be that the state is getting a match on this money. So the state's getting, you know, twice the bang for its buck if it appropriates this money, since the cities are willing to match it.
I just want to compliment Molly on how well she presented in the committee this morning. You answered the questions clearly and represented the league very well, so thank
Thanks,
you.
Corey. That's nice of you to say.
Hi, Mayor Soltansky from Sandy. Just want to point out that our unsheltered community may be congregating in the cities where there are the most resources. They're populated from all of our cities. And so we all have an interest in contributing to solutions and participating. And as everything in our city budgets has increased, so have the mitigation costs of the cities that are providing the shelter resources. So it is time, as a member of COM, I spent a lot of time on this issue over the past year, and with all the mayors looking hard at solutions, how suburban communities, rural communities, smaller cities can participate. And this is a very direct, straight, affordable way where we can all increase our participation towards solutions. So I support increasing the city's participation in the homeless mitigation fund. It's time we're due. And also looking deeply at all of our community resources where we can participate, because I know there are members of the Sandy community that are served in Midvale, in Salt Lake City. And yeah, Sandy's ready to be part of the solution.
Thank you, Mayor.
Is there one more over, or no, okay, that's great. Oh, one online? Okay.
Carson, you have one online, want to go?
Thank you. We have a question online. The question is, would it be possible to get a calculation soon of the impact for each city on this bill? Or very from maybe 440?
Yeah, I think we can do that, and hopefully you should, in your city budgets, have what that is, and we'll figure out, once we know that rate change and that cap, we'll be sure to get those two kind of multipliers out to you, or multiplier and cap out to you, and y'all should be able to figure it out, or I'm happy to help you figure out what that looks like for your city.
From a transparency, could you calculate it for us?
What?
Could you calculate it for the cities from a transparency standpoint?
From a transparency standpoint, I could calculate it for the cities.
Cam can do it in his head right now.
Okay. All right, who's tackling appropriate? Are you on appropriations? Oh, great, excellent.
Good afternoon, everybody. 3 session Saturdays down, 3 to go. That's the good news. We still have 18 and a half business days left, though, in the session, so thanks for being here, and thanks for your advocacy and efforts to date. This is just a quick snapshot of the different appropriations that we are tracking because all of the appropriation subcommittees wrap up their work this week, and then it will move to the Executive Appropriations Committee. There are other appropriations we're watching, but these are the highest priority ones. Most of these, the league board actually endorsed in concept back in the fall and early winter. Now, let me just emphasize a couple of things here. When the league board took positions to endorse the active transportation ask, they did not ask for 55 million one time and 44 million ongoing. They simply took the position to support historic investment in active transportation. So those dollar amounts are, as of this morning, what the asks are that are going through their relevant appropriation subcommittees. And we are not asking you to go talk to legislators about 55 million one time and 44 million ongoing. But what we are saying is we are supportive of that active transportation investment, and whether it comes back at 99 million, 9 million, or something in between, that'll be a huge win for local governments because this is contemplated to be spent in your communities. So the board has endorsed that piece, and then you can see in the transportation, housing, and general government spaces, the different ones that we are closely tracking. What we've highlighted in orange are the two pieces where the dollar amounts do matter. First one being this homelessness mitigation that Molly just referenced, where as of Friday, it looked like that appropriation was in trouble. As of today, it's got a fighter's chance. And it was mainly due to Molly's efforts Friday night and throughout the weekend, making sure legislators understood what that ask really meant, and then how it dovetailed into the dialogue that happened at the Salt Lake Conference of Mayors with House Bill 440 last session. On the local administrative advisor, Molly's also been pointing on this. Do you want to give a quick update on where we're at here?
Sure, and so this has gone through EOCJ and has been very well received. So right now it is ranked 29 out of 69, and I would say right now it's just important that we keep it there. And if we can move it up, great, but I don't know if there's other. Miranda's looking at me like I'm very wrong, so I might pause.
I think they're partly ranked that way.
Okay.
I think that's just how they're showing up in the list. They will, so the committee should be ranking them by noon today,
Okay.
right now. It should be done and then, yeah.
Excellent.
we'll
Excellent.
Repeat that.
Perfect. Yeah. So what Miranda just said is that those might just be more ordinal, not necessarily based on priority. That said, let's get it to 25. That feels good. So let's make it priority 25, if not higher. I don't want to set a ceiling on us. So any efforts you can do to reach out to members of that committee would be very helpful. We can circulate that in Friday, or not Friday Facts, but our nightly debrief. And especially if you are from a city or town that does not have an administrator, it would be very impactful if you could reach out and kind of communicate what this program would mean for you.
Now, the last thing I'll add, just process-wise, so we're all on the same page, is all the subcommittees wrap up their work on Wednesday. And then their recommendations will go up to the Executive Appropriations Committee, and ultimately the Executive Appropriations Committee makes those final decisions. So even after Wednesday, we'll still be tracking all of these pieces, and these are just the top priorities, let alone the other ones that we're keeping an eye on, to make sure that the Executive Appropriations Committee knows that local government is supportive of this sort of investment in active transportation and in corridor preservation and the like. And then those two specific asks of those dollar amounts are really what is necessary in the case of the homelessness mitigation for the whole system to function as designed, and ditto at the local administrative advisor to make sure that there are sufficient resources in every AOG region around the state to provide that service to our small communities that currently lack that capacity. So I put TBD on public safety because we're going to come to that here in a moment, but any just general questions about the appropriations that we are monitoring right now? Mayor Staggs?
Thanks. Is it just a general dollar amount that they're appropriating? There aren't projects specifically tied to it? Is it going to have to go through a process with Wasatch Front? Or
Yep, you got it.
Andrew shaking his head.
Yep, and thank you. I want to emphasize that too. Our role as a league is not to advocate for specific project in Cameron City or Molly City. Our role is to make sure that these different funds that will benefit your cities are invested in And so that when the time comes for Riverton to go through the process to seek those dollars, we've tried to maximize the available dollars there. So the State Infrastructure Bank is a perfect example. There have been years where that State Infrastructure Bank has been dormant or had relatively little money in it. Well, because of the last couple of years of ARPA dollars with the local match infrastructure fund, we have parlayed all of the demand for that local match into a dialogue this whole off-season of if the state funds the infrastructure bank, there are a ton of local government infrastructure projects that could benefit from that partnership. So $1 of state money matched with a bunch of local money results in this project that benefits the community, but we don't get involved at that project level space. These are also separate, I should note, from what we're anticipating to be historic investments in infrastructure funding, again, in the transportation fund and the transportation investment fund. So these are just some of the specific new asks for this current year. Any other just questions about this? Because at some point you may see action alerts and want to make sure we're on the same page. Mike?
Mike Winder, Mill Creek City Manager. Tell us a little bit what Harper has in mind on that redevelopment match grant.
Yeah, sure. So this is another one that had its genesis in the ARPA money that the state received a couple of years ago. The state, at our request and in partnership with other entities, set aside a couple of different state-funded grants where local governments could bring matching dollars either for infrastructure or in this case to facilitate redevelopment that included mixed-use projects and housing projects. So again, because of the demand for some of these programs, now you have different state leaders who are looking at taking that from one-time ARPA money and making it more of a revolving loan or ongoing funding. So in this case, this would be to help facilitate redevelopment for mixed-use projects.
Ongoing or one time?
It's still to be determined. Okay, I see, Carson, any questions online? I see 13, but I don't know if that's actually for us. Okay. The last thing I'll mention on that previous slide is that those are in the state appropriation space. So those were state dollars, and many of those state dollars could end up in city halls around the state, but those are state dollars, which is different from the potential impact of bills on city dollars, and that's what Molly's going to hit now is the fiscal impact of bills on your particular budgets.
All right, excellent. So we've been tracking the fiscal impact of all of the kind of publicly available numbered bills that have come out so far, both of the official LFA estimates as well as our own estimates, because LFA has a proclivity for citing that it will have an unmeasurable indirect cost. Right now, there are 36 bills that impact city budgets. They fall largely, well, not largely, exclusively, into 4 categories. So we have unfunded mandates, where it's essentially saying, you shall do this. We have partially funded mandates, where they say you shall do this, but here's, $1 for your efforts. We have some that are just revenue lost across the board. And then we also have a handful that are revenue shifts. Those revenue shifts are some things like the proposed gravel tax bill that is a revenue shift between cities. There's also a couple of bills that would create revenue shifts, mostly dealing with property tax within your city. So keep that in mind. Right now, our conservative estimate is that we're looking at $55+ million ongoing in a hit to city budgets. It's still early in the session. Not all these bills are going to pass. I also really want to bring up what Justin mentioned earlier, which is that these aren't all bad policies. So I don't think we necessarily need to come out and be opposed to all of these bills. Some of them are, quite good policies. We just might need to figure out if it's a priority that's an unfunded mandate that we're willing to take, or if we need to negotiate it so that it might have less of an impact. So that's what we're looking at right now. We're tracking it, we're working on it, and we'll be sure to keep you updated as the session goes on. Oh yeah, excellent. And we have been sharing that. We shared it with the governor's office. We're also looking to share it with House and Senate leadership as well. I think right now we're at the point in the session where the left hand isn't talking to the right hand, and so a lot of this will be condensed down. So we're trying to share it and essentially say, this is the total impact we're looking at. We can't afford this. So what are your priorities? What are our priorities as we navigate, what is more of a tenable expense for cities. Excellent. One of those fiscal impacts, in fact, the largest fiscal impact, we're going to talk about now. We've talked about it the past few weeks as well, but this is HB 104 for sub modifications to public safety retirement by Matt Gwynn. It implements 3 policy changes over a 5-year period. One is that it shortens the reemployment period from 1 year to 183 days. It also reduces the years of service from 25 to 22 years. It increases the multiplier for Tier 2 hybrid to 2.27%. And ultimately, that will cost local governments at least $23 million. And I really want to put a caveat on that at least, because this will compound pretty dramatically as Tier 2 grows over time. Additionally, Gwynn has put in, and this is kind of tricky, but that $23 million is for all 3 of those pieces when we look at this for local governments. Representative Gwynn is looking to put in a $40 million RFA to pay off the unfunded liability created by that number 1, so that Tier 1 reemployment period. So if funded and the bill passes as it is, it would still likely create a $15 million plus expense for cities with that Tier 2 component. Another thing to really keep in mind that isn't in the fiscal note now is that this would also, each employee would have 4% of their salary that they would need to pay in to the fund. And Representative Gwynn's expectation right now is that local governments would pick that up too. So right now you're looking at about $23 million plus, in addition to 4% of each of your Tier 2 employees' retirement. So we need to take a position on this. I want to run through a couple of things with everyone first. So last week, we did a very unscientific Slido poll with the folks who were here. And just to kind of share what we learned from that with you, 97% of last week's participating LPC attendees reported that they had raised public safety salaries in fiscal year 22. 54% reported that they would need to raise taxes to be able to afford this additional expense. 39% reported that they could absorb the expense, but they'd need to make cuts elsewhere. 7% said we could absorb this expense. And then 80% of participating LPCs, attending LPC members reported that this would reduce their ability to raise wages in the future. And it may vary for your cities, but in the research we've done in the past years, some with Representative Gwynn, some independently, the thing we hear over and over again is that public safety would prefer raise increases rather than enhancements to their retirement policy. So with that said, we're going to approach this a little differently, and that is not ideal placement. Carson, can I edit this slide while we're live? The line I need is off the screen. Okay. So essentially what we're going to do while Carson works on that is 5 different positions. Hang with me. So we're going to go through and vote on each of the 3 proposed policy changes. For number 1, we're going to consider whether or not that RFA goes through. So to start with, we need to consider whether or not we support the shortened return to work with an RFA. So essentially, a shortened return to work period with minimal financial impact on cities. Yeah. Oh, let's get a mic. Yeah, I can clarify. So the RFA would be a one-time RFA, but it would cover the unfunded liability created by that Tier 1 change.
And Sean Guzman, St. George City. I don't want to take away the ability for anyone to speak, although I believe if I make a motion, we still have the ability to speak on the motion. And so from our perspective, we have done, and I'm speaking on behalf of St. George, but Washington City's here, and I believe they've done the same thing, so has Washington County with their sheriff's office. But we have done what was originally envisioned when they came up with the Tier 2. And that is, we have been working steadily to raise the wages of our officers. And we've been able to make significant inroads in the last few years on doing that. This right here, this is really an unfunded mandate for us. We're just getting our feet used to tier 2 and our employees used to tier 2. This feels like now we're creating 2.5, tier 2.5, and then it's, you know, winners and losers. What do you do with those that are in tier 2 now, that now there's new officers being hired in tier 2.5? There just seems like there are a lot of problems with this. That said, we do not have a problem with shortening the period for rehiring those experienced officers. There are a lot out there that we would, especially now where we're short of officers, where we'd like to tap into their training and their experience to help us in our departments. And so my motion would be that we support that portion of the bill only. That would be the portion that would shorten that waiting period for rehiring the officers.
Okay. And is that contingent upon the RFA, or is that in any circumstance we would support it?
I would support in any circumstance myself.
Okay.
And I would speak further to that if anybody has any questions, but that would be my motion.
Okay, thanks. And to keep things simple right now, I think what we'll do is, and sorry, is this your job, Mayor?
Yeah, well, I was going to say, so we have a motion to, go ahead, Gary.
And just for the sake of argument, I'll second the motion.
Okay. All right, so we have a motion and a second to approve the shortening of the reemployment period, whether there's a funding connected with that or not, but to oppose all the other aspects of Representative Gwynn's bill.
And with an RFA.
With or without, is what we just said.
Yeah, it's with or without an RFA, with or without an RFA on the return to work part. Okay, that's the motion. I just want to say one thing. I mean, I hope that LPC members remember that the League commissioned a study from Y2K in connection with the police reform, the Love, Listen, Learn task force that we conducted, gosh, I think it's been 2 years ago now. But that survey of officers around the state indicated that they were more interested in increased wages than in increased retirement benefits. We had obviously been concerned about whether our ability to recruit and retain was being affected by the change to Tier 2 by new employees, but what we learned really was that maybe not be as significant as we had thought. It was really more of a wage thing. And then following that, we did see a radical increase in law enforcement and public safety salaries over the last 12 months. So.
Mayor, just a note on RFA versus non-RFA, when you shorten that reemployment period, the reason you get such a big fiscal note on that is the fiscal analysts assume that if you have to rehire sooner, that more people are going to retire early, and so they have these algorithms where they're guessing, and so it's not necessarily a real financial hit to us, and in fact it is a way to get officers back on board sooner. So I actually think this is a good motion, and just a note on that.
Yeah. One thing I might request as we're looking at this is if we could maybe get a quick amendment to that motion to still prefer the RFA version over the unfunded version.
I'll agree.
Okay, we have an amendment to the motion by the maker of the motion and the second to say that we prefer the funding.
All right.
Okay, is there any further discussion to that motion? Anything online, Carson?
It's not the motion, but just a question.
Go ahead.
So there's a question online about how much we care about the specific amount of days in the cooling off period, whether it's 60 or 90 days or 180. Just wondering if there was a big difference.
Did you get that, Molly?
I
The
didn't,
question,
sorry.
I don't know what the discussion's been, but is there a difference about the length of number of days, basically 183 versus 60 or something?
Sure.
else?
So my understanding is that essentially once you drop under 1 year, this is from Corey with URS, the actuaries treat it the same. So whether it's 364 days or 4 days, that's kind of how the actuaries look at it. So that's what I got for you. I wish I could phone a friend, Corey Cox, right now. That's what I have. I also want to make folks aware of a couple political considerations with this as well. Is that when this bill came out last year with HB 11, The league opposed it, as well as some other groups. We were able to finally get to neutral once it was subbed to only include this reemployment piece. That said, this year the political landscape has changed. The typical allies we would have in opposing this bill, either entirely or in part, are not there. The Taxpayers Association has gone neutral, and then other public safety, your chiefs, other folks have either gone to neutral or support for this bill. So I want to make sure that you all understand that we are likely standing alone and will be the tip of the spear for any opposition to this bill, either in part or entirely, and that that's some outreach and some interface that you'll likely need to do with the public, potentially with the media, and with your own officers.
Okay, any other discussion to the motion? And all those in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Any opposed? We have one opposed. Okay, the motion carries. Okay.
All right. Excellent. All right, Katie, come up for this one.
Perfect. This is an update on dialogue around the motor fuel tax. Right now, our staff recommended position on both of these bills is still position pending. The reason for that is there's going to be a substitute for sure on the first, maybe on the second, and so we don't want to take a premature position. The gist of these two bills is as follows. On House Bill 301 from Representative Mike Schultz, well, by a quick show of hands, how many people remember House Bill 362 from 2015? Raise them high. Guys, I got Lynn and Paul and Corey and Andrew and Kay. Yeah, not many of us is the point, right? Maybe fifth. I didn't look behind me. Oh, Seth, you were here. Mark. Point is not many, guys. Not many of us. So House Bill 362 in 2015 did two enormous things in transportation. Number one, it authorized the creation of what's known as the fourth quarter, which I believe 21 or 22 of the 29 counties have imposed. It also increased the motor fuel tax, but did so in a way that converted it from a cents per gallon tax to a percentage tax, but then also put a cap on what it would otherwise have been had it stayed a cents per gallon cap, or cents per gallon tax. Okay? So the equivalent of a 40 cents per gallon is the cap for what the motor fuel tax can be, but because the motor fuel tax changed from a cents per gallon to a percentage per gallon, you get that growth that you otherwise didn't get when it was just cents per gallon. Trying to see how many faces have glazed over here with that quick explanation. The good news from that bill is that local governments get 30% of the gas tax, which last year was $202 million. And that money is then allocated between cities and counties based on a formula that goes back many years. The first proposal, House Bill 301, would, right now the way it's drafted, doesn't do what the bill sponsor intends it to do. But what he's trying to basically do is decrease in the short term the annual increase that comes because of House Bill 362, because that annual increase is based on the last 3 years rolling average. And we, based on this past year, are going to be right at that 40 cent a gallon cap. So what he's trying to do is essentially flatten the curve. So instead of, because of last year's high gas prices, instead of the gas tax going up like this, it would flatten it a little bit so there's still a little space before we hit that cap. That was the intent. That is not what the current bill says. Okay? Hence our recommendation on position pending. Recognize, though, that kind of regardless of what 301 ultimately says, if the legislature does modify the gas tax, it will impact every city, town, and county in the state. Okay? They, as in the state, receive 70% of the motor fuel tax. So if they decrease the gas tax, they take the majority of that hit, but we will also have a ripple effect. They are aware of that. We've discussed it with them many times. I've met with Representative Schultz. WFRC's met with Representative Schultz. He is aware of that. He's also looking at increasing the vehicle registration fee, and local governments also get a portion of that revenue too. Okay? So hence position pending on this one, but we just want to make you aware a substitute is coming. The second bill, SB 175, was numbered over the weekend. Again, our recommendation is position pending. We're meeting with Senator Owens tomorrow. But what's contemplated here is to take $5 million off the top of the B and C. So every city, town, and county sees a haircut that adds up to $5 million. There's a formula, and then it's up to $5 million. So could be $1, could be $5 million. Sets that money into a rural account that any county or city or town therein outside of the UTA district could potentially access. Now, a couple of just quick data points for you. When you think about vehicle miles traveled, you can see city roads, or state has the vast majority of the vehicle miles traveled in the state, followed by city roads, followed by county roads, and then in terms of the local transportation options, most of the urban areas have imposed all 4 quarters. Many of the rural areas have not imposed any of the transportation quarters yet. So again, the impact is everybody would lose a small piece of that gas tax. I can't see what the bottom says. No?
Oh, that's my fever dream of a graph.
Hey, look at that.
Yeah. So I can chat through that really fast.
Yeah, how about you do
Yeah,
that?
yeah. So, because as I was reading this bill, yeah, and sorry if this truly is a fever dream of a graph, stick with me. I was not an art student. So essentially, what this bill does is it establishes the base at 2022, and so it's any growth from 2022 in perpetuity. And so what you need to know is that that doesn't necessarily account for year-over-year changes or loss very well. So if, for example, in 2023, the fund goes up $10 million, $5 million of that will go to this rural set-aside, and then the remaining 5 will go to the B&C fund to be distributed amongst local governments. If, however, let's say we go into 2024, and there is a $5 million reduction year over year, but still $5 million in growth since 2022, the rural set-aside is going to get all of that money, and you're going to take a cut. So that was just something that I wanted to make sure folks were aware of, is that this is setting it at 2022. It's not a year-over-year change, so even if there are reductions, the fund won't necessarily be reduced, but your gas tax revenue will.
No, go ahead.
So I just want to say, league staff and I had a meeting with Utah Association of Counties staff and their chair, and we had a discussion about this, and I did point out that on what basis do you take gas tax money from municipalities and counties where our county commissions or councils have had the fortitude to enact the 4th quarter and give it to counties that have not maximized the amount of revenue that they can actually collect under law by doing maybe the hard thing, but enacting that quarter. And that the folks at UAC said that's a good argument. We don't have an answer to that, and I think that's where we ought to be.
The other piece in the bill is it's asking for a $50 million appropriation from state dollars for local infrastructure. So again, the reason we're recommending position pending right now is we're meeting with Senator Owens tomorrow to walk through all these moving pieces to figure out where it could end up. But just wanted to make you aware of the potential fiscal impacts of both of those gas tax bills as currently drafted. On the Liam, we've got Lynn.
Just a quick question, Cameron. I think I understand where Senator Owens is coming from, representing Juab County and rural Utah, but what's motivating Representative Schultz's bill on delaying the growth of the transportation tax when virtually all of our communities are subsidizing our transportation fund because it doesn't generate enough money to pay for our roads?
Yeah, great point. Great point. So I'm going to answer that a couple of different ways. Number one is we are getting close to that 40-cent per gallon cap. And once we hit that cap, then the next policy deliberation that we collectively have to have, state leaders and local leaders, is what happens next. Because then we will start to lose the buying power of the gas tax, which is what ultimately led to House Bill 362 in the first place. We anticipated when House Bill 362 was passed that it would take longer to hit the cap than it actually did. And it's in part because gas prices went up faster than anyone anticipated. So that's part of it, is to try to get a little more breathing space before we hit the cap. The second piece is that there is a lot of appetite up here to cut taxes in any and all places. And because of how expensive gas has been, not necessarily this moment, but how expensive it's been, there's a lot of political appetite up here to just cut the gas tax, period. In fact, we've seen other states do that. What Representative Schultz has been trying to do is navigate those political wins with an acknowledgement that we all rely on these dollars for infrastructure, and in many ways, he's been Mr. Infrastructure during his career up here. So I think he's trying to find the balance, and that's why I wanted to emphasize that if you read 301 as currently drafted, it doesn't do what he was actually trying to do. But trying to figure out how all these pieces come together. Okay. Then just two updates on sales tax. Again, we don't have positions on these, but just to keep you aware of the moving pieces. There are still several bills out there to potentially remove food from the local sales tax base. So I would ask the question of how many were here in 2006 when we went through sales tax on food, but Gary's chuckling because he knows the number's even smaller. Yeah, Brian was here, I was here, fewer of us than in 2015. But I'll take you on a quick trip down memory lane. Back in 2006, the legislature reduced, but did not eliminate, the state sales tax on food. They reduced it from 4.75 to 1.75%. And then they removed it from the base of all of these so-called boutique taxes. Roger's watching from home and is smiling as I use that term, but the boutique taxes, so UTA, county option transportation taxes, or resort community taxes, et cetera. But food is still in our local 1% base, and it's still in the state base for purposes of that 1.75%. There is a lot of dialogue happening up here behind closed doors, and we've been involved in some of it around tax cuts, looking at property tax, income tax, sales tax, gas tax, all of the above. And one of the ideas that has gotten some traction, don't know if it'll actually make it to the finish line, has been removing food from the sales tax base, which could go one of two ways. They either remove it from the state base altogether, or they remove it from the state sales tax base and the local base. In the aggregate, if you remove it from the local base, it would be about a $99 million impact on cities and towns. So we have been very clear with that data, and we've had multiple legislators say to us, we understand how difficult it would be on local governments if food was removed from the local sales tax base. So again, you'll see several bills about that right now. Most of the dialogue is not happening in the context of those particular bills, but around the larger conversations on tax policy. Go ahead.
Yeah, and just to be clear, this isn't in a numbered bill yet, so this is why when we said the financial impact right now is about $55 million, this is not included because we have not seen this in a numbered bill yet. But just so you know, it's kind of in the ether.
Aggregate.
Yeah, in the aggregate.
The other thing on the sales tax piece that's not in a bill but should be in a bill hopefully this week is what we've talked about ad nauseum of the quote-unquote fifth. We're anticipating that will be in a bill this week, and that would modify the current .20 that expires in June, that right now is a county authorized, county imposed tax that exclusively goes to transit, and modifying that so that a portion of that, a quarter of that would go to cities and towns in the UTA area, and then you can see the breakdown outside of the UTA area. So this, we're giving you a sneak peek that this is what we're hoping will show up in that bill, and then once that bill comes out, we'll finish up the fiscal analysis so people can see it, but that would actually be new money for cities. So if you think about what I just described about the efforts up here to cut taxes everywhere, the idea that we could walk out of this session with additional dedicated revenue streams for cities is really quite astounding. So stay tuned. Once these details come together, we will be turning around to ask you for your support to get something like this to the finish line. What's covered at the bottom is really quite critical, and that is the only way we've been able to get traction about getting the potential dedicated amount to cities is the 462 compliance piece. So if a city is compliant with 462, the new 462, which we'll talk about in a moment, then that money becomes essentially an incentive for being in compliance for communities above 5,000. Would not apply to the communities below 5,000. But that's a critical piece of trying to put all these pieces together.
So this is another strategy that you can talk to your legislators about, where the league is trying to be proactive here. What we've said is, don't penalize us about the growth issues. don't talk about taking away B and C road funds, but if we talk about a new revenue source, then it'd be reasonable to say that that one could be linked to moderate income housing compliance because it's a new revenue source. So that's kind of been our strategy on that. You have more on that?
Nope, that's it.
Okay. So Michelle Kafusi started a tradition here one time by inviting somebody from the audience to come up and tell a little bit about themselves, and I forgot about that, but Mayor Zoltansky got ready to do it. So Mayor Zoltansky from Sandy, do you want to come up and tell us about yourself? Or tell jokes or whatever you want to do.
Hi everyone, I'm Mayor Monica Zoltansky from Sandy. You might know me. From time to time I've been known to wear a red cowboy hat. The reason I got started in public service was on account of my horses. I rode my horses in Dimpledale Park in Sandy and learned that Salt Lake County was going to start paving the wood chip trails. So I got organized with my friends and neighbors and horse community and led a citizen campaign to reverse that decision. So now and hopefully for a long time in the future, trails in Dimpledale Park will remain natural trails. So no asphalt in Dimpledale. So fast forward a few years, now I'm mayor of Sandy and I'm just finished my 13th month, and I've learned so much from working with each one of you. There have been fast friendships and fast mentorships that have helped me so much. And I just want to say one of the things I was so impressed with this week was Mayor Kafusi's State of the City. If you haven't seen her State of the City, wow, it is a tour de force of how to tell the story of a city's growth and also her personal journey. So I want to thank Mayor Kafusi for being such a leader and personal source of inspiration, as well as Mayor Silvestrini, Mayor Ramsey, and many, many of you in the room here. I'm very privileged to work with you. A few things about myself. I grew up in a big family in Northwest Ohio. I'm number 9 of 10 kids, and grew up in a rural community, and my first job was a paper route, pedaling probably an 80-pound bicycle with a huge basket in front, miles down a country road delivering newspapers after school. And I always worked mowing lawns and doing odd jobs, working for my parents to pay my way through college, then law school. And after law school, one of the questions was, what is the most change-making event in your career? I worked for a congressman in Washington, D.C., and worked for this congressman between undergrad and law school. And that really opened my eyes to the importance of government, what government can do, how government, there's so many people who are working to make our communities better. So I credit so much of my leadership style to what I learned from this congressman from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, a Polish American congressman like me, a Polish American like me, and how dedicated he was to helping his ethnic communities in his district. Okay, rapid fire. Favorite pastime and hobby, of course, horses. And 2 of my horses are pregnant. I'm going to have to go on maternity leave in April when I have 2 baby foals. So, favorite book or movie? Gosh, I spent my junior year abroad in Salzburg, Austria, so I have to say The Sound of Music. Best book, my mother of 10 kids, she gave all of us on our 18th birthday The Richest Man in Babylon. And if you haven't read it, it's a hundreds of years old story about working hard, saving, living within your means. Best trip I've taken to, I don't want to tell you because then you're going to want to go there, but I'll share my secret, to the San Rafael Swell, which, why isn't it a national park? I don't know, but I'm glad it's not because it's not overrun. And boy, if you want to get away and unplug, that's the place to go.
Or don't, I agree with you.
Don't tell anyone. So my favorite snack, high chews. I'm a old-fashioned shoe leather campaigner, and that's what helped me survive during my door-to-door, my grassroots campaigning was high chews. Something really cool I've done is getting elected mayor of Sandy because I'm not from Utah. I didn't come in with a traditional background, you know, and work in the PTA. I'm single, I don't have kids. And so I'm just really dedicated to my community, and I've built my network and really my family in Sandy just organically. Let's see. Oh, something cool I've done. Thursday, day in the life. We had our all-day budget retreat with our city council for 7 hours, grueling, okay, allocating $150 million plus budget in our city. And then I got home and my truck batteries were dead, and I was really determined to change it myself, so I YouTubed how to change the truck batteries because I had to haul my horses to the vet the next day. And so I went in, learned how to do it, took out 2 diesel batteries, took it to Costco, brought them back, put them in, boom, I was on the road the next day. So On the one hand, all day I'm allocating, pre-allocating big budgets, and by night I'm changing batteries in my diesel truck. So a little bit, you've got to wear a lot of hats, as you know. So dream bucket list item. When I was younger, I had the privilege of traveling on a Ural pass and saw a lot of Europe. And I used to think I want to go outside. I wanted to go internationally and had big dreams of going to seeing the Hermitage in St. Petersburg, seeing Petra, Estefan in Persia and Iran. But now, just staying home and a staycation, that is a dream bucket list item. So that's a little bit about me. Thank you for giving me your time and letting me share a little bit. And thank you also for the example of great leadership. And you motivate and inspire me every day. And I'm so privileged to be working with you. So thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Okay, back to work now.
Carson, I'll let you said you may need to refresh it, so I'll let you refresh it. Okay. Next, housing land use. So at this meeting last week, we came to you and showed you here's what we expect to be in the Senator Fillmore Commission on Housing Affordability Bill. We told you here's what we expect in the Representative White Commission on Housing Affordability Bill, and here's what we expect in Representative White's Land Use Task Force Bill. Those first two bills came out, and they have in them basically everything that we anticipated based on the negotiations. Likewise, in this meeting last week, we told you there were still unanswered questions around internal accessory dwelling units and stationary plans. We asked for a group to stay after LPC. We had a good hour-plus discussion with probably 15 or so people on internal ADUs, and we had another group, about 10, on stationary plans, and we were able to address some of those questions that then we could take back in last Tuesday's negotiations. So what I'm going to be walking through with you is what's in the bill right now, and again, where we are today is vastly different than where we started 6 months ago. So again, as a reminder, both of what was discussed during the interim and what we've been seeing in other states ranges from changing zoning, so it wouldn't be a legislative act anymore, it would be done administratively, to preemption of local zoning, to creation of a state appeals board to review local government ordinances, withholding gas tax funds and the like. So all of these were ideas that at one point or another this summer were out there and that we've been pushing back on. Here's what's actually in Senator Fillmore's SB 174. Number one, subdivisions. So again, this proposal came from us in the fall, two-step process. Now, recognize this, what you read in that bill right now, is workable, but there are still some edits that need to be made just to the language in his bill, in addition to what's going to be coming in Representative White's Land Use Task Force bill, which also dovetails into subdivisions. So we're working furiously on the legal side to crosswalk those two pieces, but just be aware that what you're reading right now won't be the final result in the subdivision space, but it's a good reflection of what we had agreed to in the fall. Stationary plans, Senator Fillmore just decided to pull stationary plan language out of his bill because there are several other stationary plan bills moving. So in an effort to try to make it cleaner, he said, let's just deal with that somewhere else. So the issue we talked about last week of that final site plan review being handled by staff, that is still likely to show up in a different bill. It just won't be in Senator Fillmore's bill. Okay, third piece. This is the direct result of your feedback after the meeting last week, where we created a definition of an IADU that is attached by a wall to a garage, because right now statute is a little unclear how to deal with garages. Clarified the internal circulation or the ability to regulate the external looks of IADUs, making sure we could do that so long as it's consistent with how we regulate other single-family units. So again, those were some discrepancies from House Bill 82 a couple of years ago that are cleaned up here. The two biggest pieces were the parking and the 75-25. On the parking piece, the question I posed to this group last week was one parking spot in addition to what? Because the code was unclear. What the group advised us on last week after our meeting that then we took back to the negotiations last week was one additional based on what the local ordinance requires. So if the local ordinance requires 2 parking spots, then you can require an additional one, but then with a maximum of 4 off-street units, or 4 off-street parking spots for that entire house. And then on the 75-25, that is still there. So the original proposal was to remove that altogether, but instead this came back to like the intent of House Bill 82. And so the date, the effective date of House Bill 82 was October 1st, 2021. And what the group agreed on last week after LPC, that then we took back to negotiate, was using that as the time frame to exclude newly constructed units as of that date. So that's what's in the bill. Even since we negotiated on Tuesday on IADUs and external ADUs, there's been more language that's popped up, and we have said no to all of it. Like, this is what we told Senator Fillmore, this is what we brought back to our policy committee last week. We got feedback from the group. We've negotiated this. This is what's in the bill. No more on IADUs or other types of ADUs.
So we've had a couple of questions online about the possibility or how subdivisions affect the preliminary concept plan. Todd, just put that really quick.
So actually, before you do that, because I think that'll fit in nicely as the next, when we get to the white piece. So let me just finish this, and then we'll come back and do a deeper dive on the preliminary plan. So just don't forget, because I've got a couple of emails about that too. Senator Thatcher, nice to see you, sir. You're always welcome, but okay. Then again, last week at LPC, actually the first 2 LPCs of the session, we asked you for alternatives on the potential consequence for noncompliance. What you surveyed back to us was the Olene Walker Housing Fund and the contribution therein, so that's what we took back in the negotiations last week. And you'll see that in the bill, Senator Fillmore's bill, he's taken the B and C stuff out, even though there's still a lot of political pressure to have B and C withheld from noncompliant cities, and it replaced it, based on your survey results, with that daily fee to the Olene Walker Housing Fund for communities that are not compliant. Now, here's where this gets critical. So Carson, I'll have you come up, because Senator Fillmore's bill is silent on changes to House Bill 462. And that was intentional, because Representative White's CHA bill has those changes. So before I turn it over to Carson to talk about the urgent next steps on Representative White's bill, are there any questions about what we've put up here on the screen with Senator Fillmore's first version of Senate Bill 174?
I want to say something.
Be my guest.
Yeah, so I just want, questions are welcome, but I just want you to know how hard our league staff has been working on this bill with Senator Fillmore. If many of you may have heard him talk at Local Officials Day and the convention, he was intended to be far more aggressive than what this bill came out as, and that's a credit to Mayor Ramsey and her work with UEOC and our staff, and the various conversations that we've had with Senator Fillmore over interim. So the good news here is that a lot of these draconian things are not in this bill, and obviously we need to monitor what comes out with Representative White's bill. But this, even though we hate making concessions, this is a great place to start for us.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. The other thing I'll note, though, is that particularly item number 1, that is a sea change in how we do administrative land use. Now, it's a sea change that, because of your feedback during the annual convention, said that this is a path worth pursuing, and that's why we doubled down on it. But it's a big deal on how we're going to be doing subdivisions at the city and county level going forward. What it does not do is change your underlying authority as legislative bodies, as city council members, to plan and zone your community. This bill does not change that. But it does change how we execute on the administrative side in a way that we think in the long term will be beneficial to both local governments and to the public. But it'll be a heavy lift this off season to get ordinances up to par with what kind of the systemic change that number 1 is contemplating. I'm still going to put a pause on that, Todd, and we'll come back to that. Do you want to just talk through the 462 piece?
Yeah, so Cameron mentioned that HB 364 will contain some cleanup language around the moderate income housing planning process. We're trying to make this it's obviously one of the more
complicated sections of code that planners have to navigate. We want to simplify that a little bit. We want to make sure that it reads clearly and consistently. These changes will, in addition to creating some appeal processes and some other approaches, we'll try to clarify and make sure that everybody's on the same page about what goes into the plan, what goes into the reports, and so that there's not a lot of confusion once reports start rolling in. We're going to have a technical working group, primarily planners, tomorrow afternoon. Please reach out to me if you'd like to participate. We're just going to review the current changes in the bill, make sure there's nothing else that we need to have in there that we're missing, and make sure that planners can navigate it more easily than they did with House Bill 364 originally. So you can either email me there, you can reach out to me, find me after this, and I'll make sure you get the calendar invite. It'll be, I think, around 1:30 on Zoom. So we want to make sure we have as many planners as possible to make sure we're encapsulating all the different approaches and perspectives. So, yeah. Anything else?
Excellent. Carson and Meg Ryan on our team have done a tremendous amount of outreach to date, hearing from your cities. In fact, Carson has a Google folder with every moderate income housing plan and report that cities submitted to DWS, so that we could be a resource to cities as we've been working through that DWS process. So again, this week is the chance to make sure we get that process fixed. And we've gotten some really positive response from the governor's office and legislative leadership who've said, look, we recognize that you shouldn't be punished for things outside of your control, and we recognize there were ambiguities that we didn't contemplate a year ago. So yes, let's make sure we get it right so that everybody from Sunset to Holiday understand here's what is required of cities, and then once we're all in agreement about the rules of the game, you have this appeal process in place, then the consequences start to take effect. The other thing that's important is the Gardner Policy database that was contemplated as part of 462 last year still isn't built yet, but will be built this summer. They're targeting June to have that database ready. And we've often said the data will set us free because it will help us tell the story of the 12,000 units that are entitled in Harriman that are waiting to be built. It'll help us tell the story in West Haven being the fastest growing city in the state percentage-wise. Sorry, Saratoga, but West Haven beat you last year. And the variety of housing types that are on the ground in all the different communities. We've gathered that data internally. We've been sharing it with legislators, but to have it as part of that Gardner database will be really important to tell the story of what's actually happening at the city level. So again, technical meeting tomorrow with Carson. Make sure if your planner wants to be involved, let him know. Other quick note, by show of hands, how many of you were either in compliance on the initial review or has since come into compliance with 462 in the last few weeks? Okay, so you look around the room, that's almost every hand, which is what we were anticipating from the get-go. So thank you for your work following up on that. We have till mid-February to finish that compliance. So if you have questions about where your city is at, let us know immediately so that we can help and try to get everybody up to that finish line. Okay, so that's what's in Senator Fillmore's CHA bill, and our staff recommendation on both of the CHA bills would be to support both of those bills because of all the work that has gone into them, kind of where they started versus where they are now. We also think a support gives us additional leverage as we're working through some of the other pieces and inevitable bombs that are likely to drop. Now, what you can't see at the top there is that says contact Sean or me, which you can always do, but this gets to Representative White's Land Use Task Force bill, which overlaps with Senator Fillmore's bill, but still has a couple of controversial pieces in it. Okay, I'll go there. Carson will come back to the slide for a second. So this is where we are. Again, we presented this last week. We asked for feedback. Several of you grabbed us afterwards or sent us emails. And then Todd, Sean, Gary, Angela, Ryan, and I, and Carson met with the PRC Tuesday morning. So we took your feedback Monday afternoon, went in Tuesday morning to negotiate, got to yes on some things, still not at yes at others. The most important pieces are these two items that are still listed in red. Property Rights Coalition still wants a state standard in state law for a residential road cross-section of 25 feet, so a width of 25 feet, and we have said no to that as a standard. Likewise, I'll spare you all the details, but having a deemed approved at the end of this 4 review process. And we've said, no, we're opposed to deemed approved. In fact, Councilmember Fowler and I last week were going back and forth about this very issue of not having a deemed approved in statute. Within this piece, which dovetails into subdivisions, those are the 2 biggest sticking points where we are not yet at yes with the PRC. This is where I'm going to turn it over to Todd to answer the question that Carson initially asked, and then take any other questions, because this is still in the drafting phase. It may be drafted this week, it may not come until next week, but this is the universe that we're negotiating in. So, Todd, do you want to take Carson's question first, and then we can open up to other questions?
The question was, what happens to the concept plan review stage that so many of us use with our subdivisions? And that is not contemplated in the current statute. We can call this a sea change. We understand this is going to be uncomfortable for many of our cities. That isn't currently in the statute. What is in the statute is that the developer comes to you prior to filing a subdivision application and requests a meeting. We're obligated to schedule a meeting with them within 15 days. If you have questions about that transition away from what your concept plan stage looks like now, please call me, we can talk about it individually. I have some ideas about how you might handle that. I don't know how many developers there are in the state.
No, just
Got a pretty green light. There aren't very many developers in this state, I think, that are going to file subdivision applications without some prior contact with your cities, your staff at some point. I think we can use that traditional common outreach to lay some of that ground that we used to use for our concept plans. I know a lot of you did do public hearings and significant public processes attached to concept plans. That's not contemplated in the statute the way it's written right now. Did we get them all, Carson?
So, Carson, did you see Garrett's question from Midvale? It's in the Q&A rather than the chat. It's all right, I've got it here, because this is something that has come up. Garrett's point is there a carve-out in the administrative process in SB 174 for public dedications? As I read the current language, dedications will be accepted by staff or planning commissions. Additionally, there doesn't appear to be a way for a municipality to withhold its acceptance of a dedication if the subdivision meets the subdivision ordinance. There may be other legitimate reasons to withhold acceptance.
Yeah, I think that's an issue that we're gonna, there's the vacation statutes that deal with public streets. In terms of your acceptance of dedications with subdivisions now, I think that's all part of your traditional land use process. So if a developer is showing a public street, an open space parcel they're proposing to dedicate publicly, something else, if that's consistent with your ordinance and it's contemplated within the approval, you're going to be accepting that. This process to me doesn't negate a signature on a plat from the city that I think will work as an acceptance of a dedication in many cases. I think Davis County is still our only county that requires some specific written acknowledgement of dedications. I don't think our other county recorders do that, since there's not anything in the statute that requires it. Just saying. But I think we're gonna have to change the way we do a lot of things with this two-step process. There's no question.
Yeah.
I have one question, Todd. It says here in the bill, the one I got yesterday, well, on Friday, a municipality shall give written notice of preliminary subdivision application, the time, place, and manner of the public meeting, under which any public comment opportunity or public hearing under subsection 5 at least 30 days before the meeting. That's a killer. Is that coming out?
That is not our proposed language. That was put in by Ledge Research General Counsel's drafters. That's something we're gonna try to change. We don't give 30 days notice on our subdivisions. Yeah, that's to me not a workable position, so that is something we'll be working to change. Please note, it allows you to receive public comment or to have a public hearing. It doesn't require it. For several years, the statute hasn't required public hearings on subdivisions. We don't want to change that.
let's go Paul and then Lynn.
A couple of questions. First, does the bill anticipate that the one public meeting will be with the planning commission, or will it be with the city council, or is that up to the jurisdiction to decide? And the second question is, how long will we have to get our ordinances up to speed with this new legislation once it's adopted?
I'll go back in first. I don't know what our ramp up is on this bill. That's been a discussion, but we don't have a defined period yet. Your city councils are out of the subdivision business now. That first meeting is with your planning commission. That's the anticipation. There are some cities that are doing this at a staff level. We're not trying to change that either if that's the case.
Just one other comment. You discussed the issue of a roadway dedication in a plat. I think most cities are already dealing with that. The challenge I had mentioned before is what happens if you have a subdivision plat that contemplates the vacation of a public street or other property dedicated to the city. We need to make sure that that administrative subdivision process does not eliminate the city council's role in that, in dealing with that adjustment to publicly dedicated property.
Yeah, I've played with some language about how to cross-reference the vacation statutes with our subdivision stuff. I haven't come up with anything definitively now, but I'm envisioning a process where your land use authority for the subdivision, whether it's your planning commission or staff, is going to make a decision that is going to be subject to and conditioned on the council's vacation of the street that's necessary for it.
And let me piggyback on something Todd just said. We recognize that there are still some of these questions that we're working through that aren't in 174. They're in the dialogue around Representative White's land use bill, and that's the need to crosswalk these provisions so that everybody sees how you get from point A to point B. So thus far, I've been collecting feedback from a bunch of different cities based on what happened in last week's meeting where we laid this out to you and people followed up and said, well, what about this, what about this? So like Lynn, for example, I've got your email that listed these 4 points, and I'm trying to aggregate all of that to then sit back down with our group of attorneys and work that into the draft. So that offer goes for any LPC member. If you have specific concerns, and I'm not going to open up the chat room, but if you're online, you can put it there. Carson will take all of those. So we make sure we hit all of these pieces so that it's clear on how the subdivisions process will work going forward within that administrative law piece. But again, I want to emphasize, there's a fundamental difference between changing how we execute our administrative land use and the state stepping in and preempting our legislative authority on planning and zoning. And neither bill contemplates that sort of preemption. That's where we drew our line in the sand, and we've spent a lot of time working through this administrative piece. And Paul, you gave a thumbs up and 2 thumbs up a second ago. What we found as we were meeting with our cities over the last few weeks on subdivisions is that what is contemplated here kind of matches some of the best practices that we're seeing in communities already. And so there is some synergy, recognizing that it is going to be a major change for a lot of communities. Matt?
Sorry, just a quick clarification question. Is that, and I didn't see it. Was that 15 business days or whatnot? I didn't read it all the way, so it is
Yep.
business days.
Yep. Yep. Okay.
One more question on the shop clocks. If a developer substantially changes the application partway through the review process, does that restart the 4?
Did one of you catch this? Because I think I know the answer, but it's best if one of you answer it.
If I knew the question. All right,
Details.
So if a developer makes substantial changes to a plan partway through the 4-step or the 4-part review process, does that start over at number 1?
It starts over at number 1.
Yep, I was 99% sure, but I wanted to make sure we were good there. Now, let me emphasize this piece too, because one of the frustrations we've heard from our members over the last few months as we've been talking about administrative land use is the frustration that a developer will come in with an incomplete application and essentially expect the city to do the work for them. This proposal should put an end to that. In fact, like the very conversation we just had where I told you this is a heavy lift on our end, and we're gonna need to make sure there's a runway to get ordinances up to speed. They're having that same conversation on the developer side, and I've heard several developers say to their members, we as developers have to do better because we can no longer walk into South Salt Lake City Hall or Riverton City Hall and bring a crap plan and expect the city to do the hard work for us. Oh, sorry, you surprised me coming up from behind there. I'm a little paranoid up here, yeah, what can I say?
I don't have a pin, I don't have the right pin on my other car.
So, our point is, we've been trying to get this to a space where both the development side and the local government side can say, we're all improving this process to hopefully then get to better outcomes.
The other thing, we haven't seen this, but the other thing we've had a discussion about with the PRC at least is, if you have a developer that is slow submitting corrections, responding to comments, they shouldn't be allowed to take advantage of the shortcut clock anymore. There ought to be a timeout for them as well, because our staff sometimes have to go back and review everything to figure out where they were. And it's not uncommon for a developer to wait, 6 months and come back with the revisions that have been requested. And so that hasn't been put in there yet, but it's something we'll still argue for, I think.
Just real quick, we can argue for it, but some of us don't care. If they want to wait 6 months, it doesn't matter, from our perspective.
Yeah, we just don't want to be on the shot clock.
Absolutely agree.
Okay, one other item in the Land Use Task Force bill that's independent of subdivisions, we've got a Slido question for it here in a second, deals with the use of local government required landscaping bonds. Right now, there's some ambiguity in the code of when we can, as local governments, require landscaping bonds for privately owned and maintained landscaping around privately owned infrastructure. The sticking point is we do have some communities that will require private landscaping bonds for somebody's individual front yard. That's not what we're talking about here. What we're talking about is for privately owned landscaping that the term we've been using is quasi-public use, where maybe it's a trail system that over here it's publicly owned and then it cuts through some privately owned land, but the public feels like this is a public trail even though it's HOA owned and maintained, and we want to ensure that the landscaping actually gets built around that trail or other types of open space. So we've gotten mixed messages as we've been meeting one-on-one with cities, so we're just asking a quick Slido on, I can't read it. And you can't either.
You got the little box there.
There we go. Is this a public answer or not? Okay, good. Okay, so the conversation we're in right now is whether a local government, city or county, could allow could use a private landscaping bond for publicly available trails that are still privately owned, or the landscaping is still privately owned and maintained. So, can support that, don't like to go with it, so it would only be that. You couldn't use landscaping bonds for other types of privately owned landscaping, okay? So fill that out. We'll keep this answer just for us, but this is one of the other remaining sticking points within the Land Use Task Force bill. Nathan?
So it can only be allowed?
That would be it. Yeah, that would be the only time. Because right now, we have one section of state code that says we can do this type of landscaping bonds, and another part of state code that says we can't. So you've got two competing state code, and what they've proposed has been, okay, you can use it for the trails because they come in and out, but not for other types of privately owned landscaping. If you have follow-up questions, again, circle back after the meeting with Carson or me or Justin or Sean or Gary or Todd, Ryan Lewis, Angela, those of us who've been in the Land Use Task Force space, because again, this is one that we've been at loggerheads over. Okay, Carson, I see 73 responses. I'm going to wait a few more seconds and I'm going to move on. We're up to 80, 85. Going once, going twice, gone. Okay. So, to summarize where we're at on housing and land use, if this were the state of Florida, and I were the Florida League presenting to you, I would be presenting on a bill that their Senate president has introduced that would have massive land use preemptions throughout it. If I were the California League coming to you saying, here's the housing bill in California, there would be massive land use preemptions throughout it. What, as of this moment, what we're presenting to you is you'd have state dollars, both in the housing side and the infrastructure side. You'd have the systemic change that's focused on our administrative land use around legislative land use, clarifications around IDUs and SAPs, clarifications that we've initiated around House Bill 462 last year and the moderate income housing plans with potential new money for cities, but also the Olin Walker fund penalty that won't go into effect for another year to make sure we get all the rules of the game correct, and then those land use task force pieces. Now, what's not on that list is LIDS. We have another internal work group meeting at 2 o'clock on LIDS, and Justin and I were in a meeting all morning on LIDS. So still TBD on LIDS, but that's where we're at as of now on the housing and land use package. Any final questions of where we're at? Mr. Hiskey?
Can I just ask for clarification on the IADU? You referenced House Bill 82 coming into effect October 2021.
Right.
Am I correct to interpret from that point forward, 75-25 does not apply?
No.
It does?
It does apply, that just
Does
the
apply.
25% exclusion does not apply to newly platted areas.
Newly platted areas?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yep.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Yep. Okay, so again, our staff recommendation of the two bills that are out is to support them with the caveat they're both going to get substituted. Like there's still going to be a lot of work on those two bills, but to be supportive in the concepts of both of those bills and then hold off on the land use task force bill as the negotiations continue. We've got another negotiation scheduled this week on the remaining parts. So again, kind of the plea to the group for the 115 online and the 100 plus in the room. If you have additional thoughts or follow-up questions about anything I just talked about for the last 30 minutes, it's now or never. You need to make sure you get that to any of us so that we sit, just like last week, we walked in there knowing where our lines were, what we could negotiate and what we couldn't, and we followed those. That's why we're still not at yes on a couple of items. So again, if you have any other comments, let us know today before we have those follow-up meetings. Final thoughts, going once, going twice. Okay. Perfect, thanks everyone.
All right, short-term rentals. This is a quick update. Our internal LPC short-term rental subgroup met, reviewed the bill, talked through it. We're still collecting feedback back from that group, and then we're still expecting to see a substitute on HB 291 that would expand the program to counties and do some other things. I think there's still some technical issues that need to be worked out, but we're still working on it. If anybody has feedback on this bill that's not a short-term, that's not been participating in the working group, please let me know. We'd love to incorporate your feedback, and that's the quick update. I don't think we've recommended a position yet since we're still expecting there to be some more changes to the bill. Yeah.
So how's this going to interact with Representative Benyon's bill? Have you had conversations with her on what she's doing? And
Yeah, so Representative Benyon has a bill file open. There's not a bill yet. She told us that it would be out soon. That bill would, at least in the concepts, would contradict, I think, a number of provisions in this. I don't, again, know exactly what will end up in the final version, but the definitions are different. It would create more fines and penalties for unlawful short-term rental operators, but as it's been conceptually proposed, would also have mandatory amnesty for illegal short-term rental operators. So it's kind of like applying the voluntary program to everybody. Again, conceptually, we haven't seen a bill yet, so we'll keep an eye on it. I know Representative Benyon and Representative Musselman have been talking. We've encouraged Representative Benyon to coordinate with Representative Musselman since Representative Musselman's been convening the stakeholder work group and everything. So we're hoping that there'll be some coordination there, and otherwise we'll just keep an eye out for that bill. Yeah, John.
Yes, Carson, looking at the reference on item 5.
Yeah.
City may increase their TRT 5%. Does that apply only to the IADUs, or does that apply to, or SQRs, I'm sorry, or apply to hotel rooms? Will they go up as well in your city to the 1.5?
Great question. As it's written right now, it would apply, it would just raise all of the TRT up to that, the municipal TRT, sorry, I should clarify, up to that rate. It's still a little bit unclear how this will work for counties, as unincorporated counties don't have the same independent TRT levy that municipalities do. County TRT also looks very, very different than municipal TRT, so it's a little bit ambiguous how that will work. Right now, this only is in Title 10, but Representative Musselman's interested in working with counties to allow them to participate as well.
Thank you.
Thanks, Carson. Just two quick questions. So the language with rewriting the not well language, that's intended to make it a little bit more clear that we can use the advertising, but not solely, right? We can use it with other things.
Yeah.
Is that understanding correct? And the second one is the pilot program, as it's contemplated in this bill right now, is voluntary. So we wouldn't have to participate in it if they don't want to.
Yep.
Is there intention, if this is a successful pilot program, to make these requirements mandatory in a future session?
So the term pilot program is a little bit misleading because it's a pilot program for the state. That's really how it was pitched. Representative Musselman's not interested in going and requiring this on forcing this on everybody. That's why he wanted it to be a voluntary program, opt-in. There might be some legislators who are interested in pushing short-term rental preemption a little bit farther, but I don't think that's not contemplated in this bill. It's not Representative Musselman's intent to have this be like the demonstration before rolling it out on everybody.
Yeah, so cities will have the ability to use online advertisements in conjunction with other pieces of evidence and don't have to participate in the pilot program if they don't want to, correct?
Yeah, so I think the definition is helpful. It's a pretty small clarification, but it gets to the original intent rather than the way that the language, and this is the restriction on advertising enforcement right now. It says that you can't even use that ordinance to, well, it could be interpreted to say that you can't even use that ordinance to enforce violations generally. So, yeah, I think the cleanup will help and make sure that different groups are on the same page.
For purposes of the program, when it says you have to allow them in 80% of residential zones, do they have to be allowed as a permitted use, or can they be allowed as a conditional use?
The bill does not stay right now. I think Representative Musselman's interested in feedback on that. I know some government entities who've been interested in participating are concerned whether just logistically that will work with their land use patterns. So I think he's open to alternatives that get to the same spirit of generally allowing them, but that's a really tricky needle to thread. Good point, Paul. And I'll just say we'll continue to work on this. Expect us to keep talking, and nothing's set in stone yet. So if you have any questions in the meantime, please reach out to me. I think I got my. Maybe. Sorry, I have to click on the side.
Okay, really quick updates. We're going to run through these in about 60 seconds. HB 173, Governor Attorney's Fee Amendments by Birkeland. This has not gone anywhere yet, but there's negotiations going on around this bill. Not sure what we're going to see this session. We're certainly going to see some discussion continuing over the interim. But this so far hasn't gone anywhere yet, but there has been lots of discussion going on. SB 87, Criminal Prosecutions by Weiler. This one's been sitting circle on the Senate floor for a couple of weeks now. We don't really think it's going anywhere at this point. It's been sitting there circled on the floor. If it moves, we'll let everybody know. SB 43, Public Notice Requirements by Pitcher. This one is going to be sitting circled on the House floor for a couple of weeks. And we expect that, one, it's a 340-page bill. It deals with public noticing, and that means it touches other bills that are also dealing with public noticing. So there's going to have to be several coordinating clauses between this bill and other bills. There's also going to be a substitute coming out that clarifies some issues that you've sent to us and that others have sent. So If you see this one sitting on the, well, you will see this one sitting circled on the floor for a couple weeks. That's expected. It doesn't mean really anything good or bad. It just means it's a big bill that has to be coordinated. School safety requirements, HB 61 by Wilcox. This is one that previously required school resource officers. It took the shall language out and it's may language now, so it's not the same mandate that was in there before. And it's also seeking to add $25 million worth of potential grant funding on this one. So that one is not as big of a concern as it used to be. SB 75 sand and gravel sales tax amendments by Sandal. We talked about this one quite a bit last week. As an update, it has moved from the second to the third read, Keller, in the Senate. Hasn't moved out of the Senate yet, but it has been moving forward. And finally, just to put this one on your radar, since we haven't talked about it yet, but we certainly will want to, HB 345, local district property tax amendments, basically mean districts need to reach out to the municipalities or creation entity to let them know if they're going to be raising taxes and get input on that. Again, this hasn't gone anywhere yet, so we don't need to discuss it, but just put it on everybody's radar.
Justin, can I ask you a question?
You may.
On HB 61?
Oh, sorry, I'm like 3 past that. Yeah. Yes, Mary, you can definitely ask about
On
61.
HB 61, I appreciate that it's gone from shall to may. What I'm wondering is there language in there or an indication that if anything were to happen at a charter school that a community, a city did not provide an SRO for, is that leaving liability on the city? Does this bill leave liability on the city if they did not provide an SRO to a charter school?
I don't know that I can answer that one definitively. I can look at that and find out. But I don't know if anybody has a better answer to that one who may have looked in depth. I don't think so right off the gate, but we'll look at that and I can get you a better answer.
Just wondered, I think that's something worth at least looking at, to make sure that this bill doesn't open that door where if from shall to may, and if you choose not to, or fiscally simply cannot.
That there's some kind of liability
does that provide a
created.
liability,
Yeah, that's worth looking at,
that each of us
absolutely.
are responsible for? Just wondering, thank you.
Okay, with that, Mayor, I think we're to the bill tracker. And Carson, did you pull this up on a separate?
Okay, so
Did you grab it?
our next meeting is the 13th of February, but in the meantime, for this coming week, are we in support of the league's positions as indicated in the bill tracker? And if so, I need a motion. Thanks, Jewel. May we have a second to support the positions in the bill tracker? Okay, Mayor Shepherd, thank you. Okay, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, thank you very much.